A big part of deconstructing from Christianity is deconstructing your concept of God. Who is God? What is he like? What are his characteristics? What are his intentions? How does he treat people? For me, this was the starting point, the catalyst for my deconstruction was examining the biblical God and comparing him to the God that I believed in as a Christian. For me to deconstruct everything that I believed about myself, about the world around me, about my reality, I had to first come to this realization that the God I was serving was not a good God. When I realized that this God was totally incompatible with a God of love and goodness and compassion and patience, I really had to re-examine everything. Because I thought, if my idea, my entire concept of God is flawed, if I don't really understand the God that I worship, then I might be wrong about all of this. And so I had to really kind of stop and re-examine God and who I believed God to be in order to really get a firm grip on where I stood. And it was such a struggle coming to realize this because I truly believed in a God of love, a God who was the ultimate source of love and light and goodness, that all good things came from this God and that love could not exist separate from this God. But when I read passages like 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7, where it says, love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no records of wrong, love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth, it always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. When I read that, and then I compare that to the characteristics of the biblical God, I am seeing polar opposites. And if we believe that God is love and God is the source of love, and we believe that love is defined the way it is in 1 Corinthians, then when we look at the character of God and when we look at the definition of love, those two things will be compatible. They'll fit. I want to kind of go through this list, this 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7. I want to go through this list of how love is defined, and I want to compare it to the biblical God and the actions that he takes throughout the Bible in the Old Testament and the New. And I want to see where we land at the end of this. You see where you land at the end of this. So let's go down the list and let's see. First, we have love is patient. What about when God commanded Jonah to go out and call out the evil, wicked ways of the people of Nineveh? And Jonah didn't really want to do that. He fled. He ran away because that was not something he was interested in doing. Well, what did God do? Did God speak to him? Did he try to reason with him? Did he try to explain to him that he would always be with him and protect him? No, what God did was send a giant storm to kind of consume the waters of where Jonah was. Jonah had gotten on a boat with this crew of people, and there was this giant storm that arose, and the people in the boat realized that it was Jonah's God who was creating the storm, and so they concluded that they needed to toss Jonah overboard in order to calm the sea, and so they did. And then what did God do? Did he save him and then try to reason with him? No. He sent a giant fish to swallow him up, and he lived in the belly of this fish for several days before getting spit back out. And then eventually he did do what God wanted him to do because God really knows how to get his way. Now, I don't consider God sending a giant storm and a giant fish to swallow Jonah up as patient. It kind of seems like a patient God would have spent more time with Jonah rather than just barking out commands. He would have reasoned with him. He would have talked to him, and he would have tried to understand where Jonah was coming from when Jonah was saying that he was afraid, or when Jonah was showing that he was afraid. Obviously, Jonah didn't want to go to this city that had a bunch of evil people and call them out. That's dangerous. And so he became afraid and he ran away, like a lot of people would probably do in that situation. But instead of trying to understand, instead of reasoning with Jonah, God just takes the most drastic actions possible to get his way. That doesn't feel very patient to me. Next up, we have love is kind. I'd say that drowning the entire world in a flood because you didn't like how humans turned out is not very kind. I'd say cursing all of humanity because two people ate a piece of fruit is not very kind. Creating people just so they can serve and worship and love and adore you and glorify your name into eternity, and then punishing them for not doing that is not very kind. Genocide, endorsing slavery, these are things that I don't see to be very kind, but I see that the biblical God does over and over and over again. So what about love does not envy? God calls himself a jealous God over and over and over and over again. Jealousy is when you're afraid that someone else is going to take what you have. You know, you have something and you're jealous for that thing. You don't want someone else to have it. Envy is a little bit different. Envy is wanting something that somebody else has, you know, so they have a possession, you want it, you envy that. But all throughout the Bible, God is jealous for his people. He's jealous for them in a way that he doesn't want them straying. He doesn't want them loving other gods. You shall have no other gods before me. It's in the 10 Commandments. And so in a way, I feel like it's just a precursor to envy. He's jealous for his people because when his people go and worship other gods, he becomes envious and he wants those people. He wants their attention. He wants their adoration. He wants their worship. And if they're giving it to some other God, then isn't he being envious of what this other God has? I mean, is that not the definition of envy? And so it's interesting to me how God gets away with being jealous, but he says, don't be envious. Love does not envy. Yet God envies. What about love does not boast? This is an interesting one because I feel like the entire Old Testament is just God boasting about his power and his glory and how great he is and how wonderful his world is and how he can do anything and everything. And we're just mere mortals. I feel like that is the Old Testament in a nutshell. But if we look at specifically Job 38 through 40, in Job 38, God is kind of speaking back to Job after Job has been lamenting all of his suffering. And he spends the chapters 38 through 40 basically just bragging about how great he is. He says, "Who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundations? Tell me if you understand who marked off its dimensions. Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? Or who laid its cornerstone while the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy?" That is just the first 7 verses. If you keep going, it just continues. God is just bragging about all of the great things he's done. Where does the darkness reside? Can you take them to their places? Do you know the paths to their dwelling? Surely you know, for you were already born. You have lived so many years. Look how snarky God is. Like he's basically just telling Job, what are you complaining about? You don't know anything. I know everything. Were you there at the beginning of the creation of the universe? Were you there when I formed the clouds and formed the sky? You don't know anything. You're just a mere human. You're just a man. I'm God, and I can do anything. Now, keep in mind, this is after Job suffered and lost pretty much everything in his life. So it's not really the time for God to be boasting, but he is. And so right here, love does not boast, yet God spends multiple chapters in Job after having allowed him to suffer immensely for no reason other than just to win a betting match against Satan. He just goes on and on. Look how great I am. That's boastful. Love is not proud. Yet in Genesis 1:31, God is proud of his creation. Genesis 1 verse 9, and God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together in one place. Let the dry land appear. And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. In verse 12, the earth brought forth vegetation plants, yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, and each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. God is proud of his work. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to be proud of your work. I don't think pride is a bad thing at all. The Bible really, really likes to drive this point that pride is such a bad thing. Pride comes before the fall. Is that biblical, or is that just something people made up? Oh, no, it is. It is. It's in Proverbs. You know, sometimes people say things like, God only helps those who help themselves. And you think, That's not in the Bible, but yeah, Proverbs 16:18, pride goeth before destruction. So over and over again, the Bible very much warns against pride, about feeling good about the things that you do, because you are just a mere mortal. You are nothing. You are just a sinner, and nothing you do is good, and God is great. I mean, that is the message of the Bible, is it not? In Matthew 3, at Jesus' baptism, right after he was baptized, in verse 17, it says, "And behold, a voice from heaven said, 'This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. I am proud of my Son, who is also me,'" as a human incarnate. So basically he is proud of himself. He's at least proud of the Son he created. And if Jesus is God in some warped roundabout way, however they like to use their apologetics to explain that, if Jesus is God, then God is saying, I am pleased with myself. I am proud of this. God has pride. And again, there's nothing wrong with having pride. I don't think this is necessarily a bad trait. But if we're going off of the Bible, we're going off of what the Bible says, and the Bible says that pride is a bad thing, and then the Bible is saying that love is not proud. When God shows that he is proud of the things that he does, he is not acting in love. Love does not dishonor others. There are people that he considers to be wicked or bad or doing things he does not like, but I'd say he certainly dishonors people. Isaiah 3 verse 16 says, "The Lord said, because the daughters of Zion are haughty and walk with outstretched necks and glancing wantonly with their eyes, mincing along as they go, tinkling with their feet. Therefore, the Lord will strike with a scab the heads of the daughters of Zion, and the Lord will lay bare their secret parts." Well, you can guess what that means. It says, "In that day, the Lord will take away the finery of the anklets, the headbands, and the crescents, the pendants, the bracelets, the scarves, the headdresses, and the armlets, and the sashes, and perfume boxes, and amulets." It goes on. And it says, "Instead of perfume, there will be rottenness. Instead of a belt, a rope. And instead of well-set hair, baldness." So he's going to make these women bald. And later in the Bible, it says that a woman's hair is her glory. So I think that is the very definition of dishonoring a woman. And yeah, sure, you can say that these women are haughty. They walk with outstretched necks. They're mincing along as they go and tinkling with their feet. So apparently these women are just too fine for God, too fine to exist. And so God wants to dishonor them. In Genesis 11, 1-9, think about, we talked about the Tower of Babel in a recent video and kind of went through that story. And in that story, the people are building a tower up to the sky. They're trying to make a name for themselves. They're trying to start a legacy. And so they come together as one group and they work together and they start building this city. And it doesn't seem to be any kind of an act of rebellion against God. It doesn't say anything about that. It just says that they wanted to create a name for themselves. But what does God do? He confuses all of their language and scatters them out so they can't keep building and working together. He dishonors their legacy that they're trying to build. He dishonors their name that they were trying to proclaim. And so obviously we see that when it says love does not dishonor others, that is completely opposite of how God acts, especially toward people that he doesn't like or people that do things he would prefer them not do. Love is not self-seeking. Now, this one is, I don't know how anybody could look at God and think he is not self-seeking. This is a God who created humanity so that they may glorify him. In Isaiah 43:7, it says, "Everyone who is called by my name, whom I created for my glory, whom I formed and made." This is a God who says again, "You shall have no other gods before me. I am number one. You will worship me. You will love me." Look at the first 4 commandments. "Thou shalt have no other gods before me. You shall not make any graven image. You shall not take the Lord your God's name in vain, and you must remember the Sabbath and keep it holy." The first 4 commandments that are supposed to be the ultimate source for morality, moral values, is all about God. It's all about focusing on him and what he wants. And he's the one commanding it. He's the one saying, hey, you must love me. You must obey me. You must honor my day. You must not take my name in vain. To argue that this God is not self-seeking is to argue against the biblical God. Love is not easily angered. We look all throughout the Old Testament and God pours his wrath on everyone for every reason. God is very angry with humanity, and he is always pouring his wrath on humanity. And then you get even to the New Testament where he says he's going to pour his wrath on all of the sinners when they enter hell. And I'd say that God is up there. He's pretty angry. Like all throughout the Bible, he's described in a way that makes him seem very, very mad, very full of wrath. And Christians will say, well, he's so angry at sin. He's mad about sin. Well, okay. He's still mad. He's still easily angered. And if you are God, if you were the most powerful entity in the universe, you created all things and you created everything knowing how it would all turn out, knowing all of the things that would happen that would make you so angry, then you really have no reason to ever be angry. Because if you are angry about something that's happening that you planned to happen, then you're just making yourself mad. And so, in my opinion, that means you are easily angered. Love keeps no records of wrong. We'll tell that to all of the descendants of Adam and Eve, because apparently Adam and Eve ate a piece of fruit that God told them not to eat. And now all of us have to suffer the consequences for that. If you're looking at it through the, kind of evangelical Protestant lens, and we talk about this inherited sin, this original sin, all people are sinners, all people are cursed with this sin nature because of what two people did that none of us know and have ever met. If that is true, well, then it seems God does keep records of wrongs. It seems he remembers well when people do wrong because he curses all of humanity for it. So I think God is keeping records. Otherwise, we wouldn't all be punished for what somebody else did. Not only that, but look at Exodus 20, verse 5. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sins of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me. So yeah, I'd say that God he's keeping a list and he's checking it twice. Love does not delight in evil. Well, I don't know about delighting, but God created the world, said it was good. And then in Isaiah 45, verse 7, it says, I form the light and create darkness. I make well-being and create calamity. I, the Lord, do all of these things. Calamity is synonymous with evil, and many translations do use the word evil. And regardless of if you're saying calamity or evil, I would say that anybody who intentionally causes calamity is causing evil. If we're going to use that term evil to describe really bad, immoral things, then intentionally causing calamity, which is disaster and distress, that is evil. That's evil. And so if God looks at his creation, if he thinks that it is good, and a part of his creation is the creation of calamity and evil and bad and all of that, then I can only conclude that God delights in evil and calamity. Love rejoices in truth. One instance that came to mind when I was thinking on this and thinking, okay, love rejoices in truth. Are there any ways in which God does not rejoice in truth? And the first thing that popped in mind was Abraham and Isaac. When God instructed Abraham to go and sacrifice his son, he didn't tell Abraham that there was a different plan. He didn't tell Abraham, don't worry, you're not going to have to do it. He said, I want you to go do this. Now, I'm not saying he directly lied, but I think that in a way he deceived Abraham because he gave him an order that he didn't intend for him to fulfill. He was testing him. And so in a way he was being deceitful in order to get Abraham to do something, in order to test him and see what he would do. While I don't think that we could make a very strong case for God not rejoicing in truth, I think that there are definitely times when God did not use the truth, but instead chose to be deceptive to fulfill his own purpose. Love always protects. Love always protects. Except for when God gets angry at the entire world and drowns them in a flood. I think about like the babies and the toddlers, the children of the flood. There had to have been babies and toddlers. There were people of all ages. I would imagine there always have been. So there are these babies and toddlers that die as a part of this judgment against the world, that die in this worldwide flood. God's not protecting them. God was not protecting those children at that time when he Or what about during the Passover when people were instructed to put the blood on the door to spare their firstborn? Well, it says the plague came through and it killed every firstborn of who didn't have the blood on the door, including slaves. So there were Egyptian slaves who lost their firstborn children of all different ages, whether they were grown or they were babies, it doesn't really matter. God did not protect them. They were not protected. It was their families' responsibility to protect them, but in that circumstance, put the blood over the door. But according to this, love always protects. And if God is love, then God will always protect you. But I don't see that happening throughout the Bible. I see God hurting people. I see God encouraging people to own other people as property, to enslave them. You're not protecting someone if you're telling your people to enslave them. And so maybe God protects his specific chosen people that he likes and favors, and only when it suits him in his glory. But look at Job. I mean, God may have protected Job, but he certainly didn't protect Job's family from Satan. God allowed Satan to go and do the things that he did to Job. Love always trusts. Well, I'd say that a God who tests his people, and people are always saying God is testing you when he feels withdrawn or when you're going through something, I'd say that that is a show of a lack of trust in humanity. If love always trusts, but God doesn't trust people enough to not test them to see if they're going to be faithful and behave and be obedient, well, then God's not trusting people. And so therefore, if love always trusts and God is not being trusting, well, then God is not love. It's really easy to just kind of break that down and conclude that. And then you have to special plead for God for that not to be the case. To love God and to be loved by God should be this mutual thing. It kind of seems like in this passage in Corinthians, it's all about this is how love is supposed to act when humans are engaging in love. But when God does it, it's different. We're going to special plead. We're going to make special exceptions for God when it comes to the word love, because he's not hitting any of these. Now, after that, we have love always hopes. Love always perseveres. Okay, sure. God has hope and he perseveres. All right. So he's got 2 out of 15 that we have here. I'm just not seeing a God who aligns with this definition of love. Again, you have to special plead for God. You have to make a special exception for God. And so when Christians say that God is love, and then they give this definition of what love is and what it looks like, how to recognize love. And then you compare the two and you say, well, God doesn't do any of these things. The Christian is going to respond and say, but he's God. He's way above ours. You can't compare God to a human being. But what I'm saying is that you're telling me that this God is love. And then you're defining love as patient, kind, not quick to anger, doesn't envy, all of these things that are the complete opposite picture that we're getting of God in the Bible, mostly the Old Testament, but even throughout the New Testament too. We just see a different picture. And so you have to get to a point where you think, okay, is this God making sense? Is this lining up? Is it cohesive? Because to me, it doesn't look like it. To me, what it looks like is we're getting 2 different ideas of this God, one that we're reading about and one that we're being preached about. And these 2 gods are polar opposites. What they're telling me about God doesn't align with the God that I'm reading about. Which God do I follow? Which God do I believe in? Do I believe in a God who is love? Do I believe in a God who does not dishonor, who is not quick to anger, who doesn't seek himself? Well, if I believe in that God, then I certainly can't believe in the God of the Bible. And if I believe in the God of the Bible, then I certainly can't believe that love is any of these things the Bible claims that it is, if God is love. So what do we conclude? Well, God is not love, or this God does not exist. It's made up. It's man-made. So I'd love to hear what you think in the comments. Let me know if there's something you think I missed. Maybe there's some verses that you thought of while we were kind of going through the list. Maybe there's some verses that you thought of that really kind of drive that point, that God is not being reflected in this definition of love. So let me know what you thought. Leave your thoughts in the comments, whether you agree or you disagree, whatever it may be. If you haven't already, please do subscribe to my channel. Ring the bell if you want notifications for when I post future videos. That helps me out. It helps get my videos out to more people and helps more people see my videos who might need to hear someone say these things out loud that they've been thinking. So I appreciate you so much for joining me today. And I think that's all I've got. So I'll see you next time.